You never expect danger in the quiet moments, but Ava Tran knew better than to trust a peaceful evening. The sun was setting over a lonely highway outside Atlanta, casting a warm, golden glow across the landscape. Ava Tran guided her black Honda Civic into a small gas station on the edge of the road. After a long day at a police training seminar in Tennessee, she and her partner, Lena Alvarez, were eager to fill up and continue their journey home. Ava glanced at her fuel gauge, noting it was dangerously close to empty. "It's another hour to the city, and I don't want to risk it," she murmured to Lena, who nodded in agreement, her eyes still heavy with sleep from their earlier drive. As Ava began to pump gas, Lena stepped out to dispose of their empty coffee cups and grab some snacks from the convenience store. The hum of the gas pump was the only sound breaking the silence of the evening. That's when they heard it, the distant rumble of motorcycles. Ava's instincts went on high alert. Glancing up, she saw 3 motorcycles gleaming in the fading light, pulling into the station lot a little too fast. The riders, all wearing worn leather vests and looking rough around the edges, parked their bikes near the store entrance. Ava's eyes narrowed. Something about their movements felt off, too aggressive, too loud for the stillness of the evening. Inside, Lena noticed the cashier, a young woman named Maya, suddenly looked tense as the bikers entered the store. The biggest of the 3, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a rugged face and gray beard, approached the counter and leaned forward, his voice a low rumble. "How about giving me your number, sweetheart?" Maya's hands trembled as she tried to stay calm, her gaze darting nervously toward Lena. Lena didn't hesitate. She took a step closer, keeping her voice steady but authoritative. "Is there a problem here?" The men turned, looking Lena up and down with condescending smirks. "Stay out of it," one of them sneered, blocking her view of the counter. Ava, sensing trouble, kept her hand close to her concealed weapon. The quiet evening had shifted, now thick with tension. What these bikers didn't realize was that they just picked a fight with the wrong women. Stay tuned to find out how Ava and Lena take control of the situation. Ava felt the tension ripple through the air, sharp and electric. Ava took a deep breath, grounding herself. She knew from years on the force that situations like these could escalate fast. Her eyes met Lena's, and they exchanged a look that spoke volumes. They were both ready, prepared to confront whatever came their way. Inside the store, Lena faced the bikers without a hint of fear. The ringleader, the tall man with the gray beard, stepped closer, sizing her up with a smug grin. "Didn't anyone teach you to mind your own business?" he sneered. Lena raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms casually. "Didn't anyone teach you how to talk to people with respect?" The man's smirk faded, replaced by a glint of anger. His hand clenched into a fist, and Ava saw his buddies shifting uncomfortably, as if waiting for the go-ahead to make a move. Outside, Ava's hand hovered over her phone, ready to call for backup if needed, but she knew they were alone out here. It was up to them to handle this. Lena didn't back down. "We can do this the easy way," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Or, we can do it the hard way. Your choice." The biker chuckled, clearly underestimating her. He turned to his buddies with a grin, saying, "Looks like we've got ourselves a couple of tough girls." Ava had heard enough. She took a step forward, her voice cutting through the tension. She said, "Your choice. So what's it going to be?" The bikers turned to her, visibly surprised. The tall man's face twisted with annoyance. "You two just don't know when to quit, do you?" he growled. Without missing a beat, Ava responded, "Only when it's the right thing to do." Her words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with the promise of a challenge. The bikers exchanged glances, their expressions darkening. They weren't used to being stood up to, let alone by 2 women who didn't even flinch in the face of their intimidation. The tension reached a boiling point as the ringleader took another step toward Ava, towering over her. But she held her ground, her gaze steady and unyielding. Will Ava and Lena's bravery be enough to turn the tables, or will the bikers make a move they'll regret? Tune in for the next chapter as the standoff at the gas station escalates. Lena's patience thinned as she watched the ringleader lean in, his face a mixture of arrogance and disdain. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. All it would take was one wrong move, a single spark to ignite the tension into an all-out fight. Lena had seen this kind of bravado before, men who thought their size and numbers granted them control. But she wasn't one to be cowed. The biker sneered, tilting his head. "What's it going to take to make you two leave?" he asked, the threat barely veiled. Lena smiled coolly. "Nothing you've got," she replied, her voice steady. Ava positioned herself beside Lena, standing shoulder to shoulder. She could feel the simmering anger in the room, the unspoken challenge that lingered between them and the gang. Ava's hand twitched toward her phone, but she knew any sudden movement might escalate things. The ringleader glanced at his gang, emboldened by their silent support. "Ladies," he said mockingly, "I suggest you walk away while you still can." Lena's jaw clenched. "Or what?" she shot back, her eyes narrowing. "You're just going to keep harassing innocent people?" The biker laughed, a hollow sound that sent a chill through the room. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a menacing whisper. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Ava's patience snapped. "And you have no idea who you're dealing with," she retorted, her voice filled with a quiet strength. The bikers exchanged surprised glances, momentarily thrown off by her boldness. Ava didn't give them time to regroup. "You think you can scare us because you've got numbers? We've dealt with tougher than you." The biker leader's expression faltered, just for a second. He hadn't expected the defiance, the absolute refusal to yield. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face, as if he was beginning to realize that this was no ordinary confrontation. Lena took advantage of the momentary hesitation. "Here's the deal," she said, her tone cold and uncompromising. "You leave now, or we call this in and make sure you're explaining yourselves to a judge by morning." The leader's face twisted with anger, his pride stung. He was used to intimidation, used to people folding beneath his stare. But these two wouldn't bend. He looked at the others, a silent question in his eyes. Some of the gang members shifted uncomfortably, clearly uncertain. Ava's heart pounded as she held her ground, knowing this was a dangerous gamble. But she trusted Lena, trusted their unspoken bond and shared understanding. They could handle this, she was sure of it. The ringleader scowled, but slowly, he straightened up, signaling to his crew with a sharp nod. "You've got lucky today," he muttered, clearly not wanting to admit defeat but sensing he was outmatched. He cast a final, lingering look at them before backing away, leading his gang out of the gas station. As the bikers retreated, Ava and Lena finally exhaled, the tension in the room dissipating. They watched until the gang roared off on their motorcycles, the sound fading into the distance. Lena turned to Ava, a triumphant smile on her face. "Didn't think they'd actually back down," Ava admitted, a grin spreading across her face. Lena shrugged. "Guess we're more intimidating than we look." They shared a laugh, the relief evident in their voices. But as they looked out at the now empty gas station, Ava couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. She had a gut instinct that the bikers wouldn't forget this encounter, and she'd be ready if they came back for more. But what if the gang decides to strike back? Will Ava and Lena's courage be enough to withstand the challenges ahead? Find out in the next chapter, where the aftermath of their standoff takes a surprising turn. The night was quiet, but Ava's instincts buzzed with unease. Ava paced the length of her small apartment, her mind replaying the events at the gas station. The bikers' faces, the tension, the glint of defiance in their eyes as they walked away. It all felt like a coiled spring waiting to snap back. She knew people like them rarely took no for an answer. She poured herself a cup of coffee, staring out her kitchen window. The streets below were deserted. A sleepy calm settled over the neighborhood, but Ava's thoughts were anything but peaceful. Her phone buzzed on the counter, jolting her from her reverie. It was Lena. "You up?" Lena's voice was soft but sharp, and it carried an unspoken concern Ava recognized instantly. "Yeah, couldn't sleep either?" "Not a chance," Lena replied with a dry chuckle. "I keep thinking about what went down. Felt too easy, don't you think?" Ava nodded, though Lena couldn't see her. "Way too easy. Guys like that don't just walk away. They're probably cooking up something right now." Silence lingered between them, a mutual understanding in the quiet. They'd been through enough close calls over the years to know when trouble was brewing. And tonight, it felt like something was building in the air, thick and unavoidable. Lena sighed on the other end of the line. I don't like sitting here waiting for the next shoe to drop. We should go back, check things out. Ava felt a rush of relief. She'd been thinking the same thing, but part of her had worried it was just her imagination getting the best of her. You took the words right out of my mouth. Let's meet up and swing by the gas station. Just in case. They agreed to meet in 10 minutes. Ava grabbed her jacket, checking the clasp on her holster out of habit before she left. She made her way down to her car, her footsteps echoing in the still night air. As she drove to their meeting spot, her mind raced with possibilities. Had the gang already made their next move? Or were they biding their time, waiting for the right moment to strike? Ava's instincts were rarely wrong, and right now, they screamed at her to be ready for anything. She pulled up next to Lena's car a few blocks away from the gas station. Lena got out, her face set with the same look of wary determination Ava felt. Together, they walked the last stretch, keeping to the shadows as they approached the gas station. The place looked deserted, but something felt off. Ava noticed it first, a faint glimmer of broken glass near the pump. She crouched down, inspecting the shards. They've already been here, she whispered, her stomach tightening. Lena's eyes narrowed as she looked around, scanning for signs of movement. They probably wanted to send a message. Breaking things, leaving a mess, classic scare tactic. But as they stepped closer, they saw the extent of the damage. The windows were smashed, and crude graffiti sprawled across the walls, taunting messages scrawled in thick black paint. Ava's fists clenched as she read the words, anger igniting in her chest. They wanted us to see this, Lena said, her voice steely. They're baiting us, trying to get a reaction. Ava took a steadying breath, her mind racing. They couldn't let the gang get the upper hand. This was exactly what they wanted. An emotional response, a chance to pull them into a game of intimidation. But if they were smart, they could turn the tables. They think they're calling the shots, Ava murmured, a glint of resolve in her eyes. But we're not falling for it. Lena gave a slow nod. Then we need to be 2 steps ahead. Let's make sure they regret coming back. They exchanged a silent agreement, a plan forming between them without words. They'd take the fight to the gang, but on their terms. Ava took one last look at the graffiti before pulling out her phone. There was someone she needed to call, someone who could help them take this operation up a notch. She dialed the number, her fingers steady and deliberate. When the voice on the other end answered, she spoke with quiet determination. It's Ava. I need a favor. As Ava and Lena set their plans into motion, what alliances will they forge, and how far will they go to protect their ground? Stay tuned as their fight intensifies in the next chapter. Ava's heart raced as the phone call ended, the weight of her next move settling in. She looked over at Lena, who was still standing by the shattered gas station window, eyes scanning the dimly lit street. The conversation had been brief, but the implications were clear. Help was on the way, but it would come at a cost. Ava wasn't sure if she was ready to pay that price. Lena turned and raised an eyebrow. You called in the backup? Ava nodded, though the knot in her stomach tightened. We're not fighting this alone. But there's more to it. It's not just the bikers anymore. Lena's expression hardened. What are we walking into? Ava took a deep breath, turning to face her. I just got a call from someone on the inside. The gang's connected, bigger than we thought. They've got ties to people who aren't afraid to get dirty. It's not just a turf war anymore. It's a warning. The night air felt colder all of a sudden. The gravity of the situation hit both of them at once. The stakes were higher now, and there was no going back. Ava wasn't sure what she'd expected when she took this job, but this wasn't it. Lena's voice dropped to a low murmur. So what now? We keep waiting, hope the cavalry shows up, or do we take the fight straight to them? Ava looked around, noting the stillness of the streets. The gang had made their message clear. They were watching. And if she and Lena didn't act fast, they'd be sitting ducks. We move. Now. With a sharp nod, Lena followed Ava to her car. They didn't waste any time. They drove through the darkened streets with a single goal in mind: get to the gang before they could regroup. Ava's mind raced as the miles passed by. They needed information, and the only way to get it was by going deeper into the territory that the bikers controlled. She could feel the weight of the danger hanging over them. They were about to walk straight into the lion's den, and neither of them knew what was waiting on the other side. As they reached the outskirts of town, Ava turned onto a narrow street lined with old warehouses. This was where the bikers had set up shop. The place reeked of danger, every shadow hiding an unseen threat. Ava slowed the car, peering through the windshield at the looming buildings ahead. "Where's the intel?" Lena asked quietly, her voice laced with tension. "Trust me," Ava replied, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. "I know where to find it, but stay close. We're not alone out here." They parked the car a few blocks away, careful not to draw attention. They both got out, walking briskly down the street toward the warehouse. Ava's hand hovered near the concealed weapon at her side, ready for anything. The street was eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from their footsteps echoing off the concrete. As they reached the warehouse, Ava motioned for Lena to stay back, then approached a door at the side of the building. A quick check confirmed that it wasn't locked. Ava's heart hammered in her chest as she eased the door open, slipping inside. The warehouse was dark, the air thick with dust and the smell of oil. Her eyes adjusted quickly, and she moved silently through the shadows, her senses heightened. She knew the layout of the place well enough. This was where the gang stored their bikes, their weapons, their illicit goods. She stopped by a stack of crates and crouched down, reaching into a small compartment hidden beneath. There it was, files. She grabbed the folder marked with a faded red stamp, then motioned for Lena to follow her out. They retraced their steps, but just as they were about to exit the building, the sound of engines roared to life outside. The bikers were coming back. "Move," Ava hissed, grabbing Lena by the arm and pulling her into a nearby alley. They ran, hearts pounding in their chests. The sound of heavy boots followed them, growing closer. Ava risked a glance over her shoulder and saw two of the bikers rounding the corner. Her mind raced for an escape route. "Up here," Lena whispered, nodding to a fire escape ladder. Without hesitation, Ava scrambled up the rungs, pulling Lena with her. They made it to the roof just as the bikers reached the base of the building, their headlights casting long shadows across the alley. They ducked behind a ventilation unit, trying to steady their breathing. Ava's hand trembled slightly as she pulled the file from her jacket, opening it. Inside, there were names, people in power, businesses, and locations linked to the bikers. The gang was just a front for something much bigger. "We've got them," Ava muttered, scanning the documents. "But we're not done yet. We need to get this to the right people." Lena nodded, but the tension on her face was unmistakable. "And the bikers?" Ava looked out at the street below, the gang still hanging around the warehouse, unaware of their escape. She was ready to finish this. "We'll handle them. But for now, let's make sure they don't have the upper hand." Surrounded by danger and on the edge of a much larger conspiracy, Ava and Lena must outsmart the bikers and escape with the truth. Will they make it out unscathed, or is this just the beginning of a deadly game? The moment Ava stepped out of the alley, she knew it was a trap. The street was still, almost too quiet, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She'd seen enough to know that silence like this didn't come without a price. She glanced at Lena, who was already assessing the situation, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the shadows. "Don't move yet," Lena whispered, grabbing Ava's arm just as she was about to take another step. "We're being watched." Ava's pulse quickened, the pressure mounting in her chest. She could feel the weight of the situation, the lives at stake. The bikers had already gotten wind of their movements. There was no escaping the chaos now. Their next move had to be calculated. "Where do we go from here?" Ava asked, voice low and controlled, even though every instinct screamed for action. Lena's gaze flickered over to a side street leading into an industrial complex. "That way. It's a shortcut to the safe house. We can regroup, make contact with our source. But we need to move fast." The two women made their way swiftly, staying low as they moved through the alley, the sound of distant motorcycles humming ominously in the background. Ava's mind raced. She had the intel, but now the real fight was just beginning. This wasn't about stopping a few bikers. This was about taking down a network, a web of corruption that stretched far beyond what she could have imagined. They reached the edge of the industrial complex, the tall, rusting gates standing like silent sentinels. But as they neared, a shadow moved in the corner of Ava's eye. It was too quick to identify, but she felt the shift in the air. Someone was there. Ava held her breath and motioned for Lena to stop. She signaled to the back of the complex where an emergency exit was marked with faded orange paint. The two of them moved silently toward it, but just as they reached the door, a voice cut through the night. Going somewhere? Ava spun around, her hand already on the grip of her weapon. There, in the half-light, stood a man in a leather jacket, his face partially obscured by the shadows of a street lamp. His grin was wide, almost too wide, like he was enjoying the game. "Didn't think you'd make it out that easy," the man said, his voice low and mocking. Lena stepped forward, her stance firm and unyielding. "Who are you?" The man shrugged nonchalantly, as if they were just having a casual conversation. "Does it matter? The fact is, you're on my turf now." Ava's eyes darted to the sides, instinctively calculating their options. She could feel the tension building in the air, and she knew they were at a crossroads. If they made the wrong move, they'd be cornered. "You're with the bikers?" Ava asked, her voice steady despite the undercurrent of danger. The man's grin deepened. "Not exactly, but I do work with them, from time to time. Let's just say we have mutual interests." Ava's mind clicked into overdrive. This wasn't just about the bikers. There was someone higher up pulling the strings, and this man was part of that network. He was their way in, whether he realized it or not. "We don't want trouble," Lena said, her voice calm but dangerous. "We're just passing through." The man's eyes flicked to the gun at Ava's side, then back to her face. "I don't think it works that way. See, you're both already in too deep. The boss won't take kindly to this little stunt." Ava's pulse raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "The boss? Who's the boss?" The man chuckled, shaking his head. "Now, that would be telling. But let's just say, you don't want to meet him. Trust me." Ava didn't have the luxury of trusting anyone, not anymore. Every word that man spoke was a clue, a breadcrumb leading her deeper into the heart of the operation. But she couldn't afford to play it out here. Not with this man and his cryptic answers. Without warning, she stepped forward, drawing her weapon. The man's eyes widened, but it was too late. He was already too close for her to hesitate. "Get out of our way," she said, her voice cold and commanding. The man looked at her, then at Lena, before stepping back with a sarcastic laugh. "You two are real pieces of work. But don't think for 1 second that you've won. This is far from over." Ava didn't waste another second. She moved quickly, grabbing Lena's arm and pulling her toward the emergency exit. The door creaked open, and they slipped inside, disappearing into the darkness. They didn't stop running until they reached the safe house. As the door slammed shut behind them, Ava let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. But there was no time to relax, not now. Inside, the room was dimly lit, but there was a sense of relief that came from knowing they were temporarily safe. They both collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion hitting them all at once. "You think he was telling the truth?" Lena asked, wiping the sweat from her brow. Ava's gaze remained fixed on the door, as if expecting someone to burst through it at any moment. "I think he knows more than he's letting on. But we're getting closer. We need to find out who's behind all of this." Lena leaned back, her eyes narrowing in thought. "You're right. But we're not done yet. We're just getting started." Ava glanced down at the file she'd pulled from the warehouse. The names and locations on the pages were starting to make sense, but they were only the beginning of a much bigger puzzle. As Ava and Lena regroup and recover, the question remains. Can they dig deeper into the criminal underworld, or will the mysterious boss pull them into an even more dangerous game? By the time Ava realized they'd been followed, it was too late. The safe house felt more like a cage now. The walls, once offering solace, seemed to close in with every passing minute. Ava's instincts had been sharp, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been tailing them ever since they left the alley. The whispers of the city outside felt like an ominous reminder of how vulnerable they truly were. Lena was scanning the file they had taken from the warehouse, flipping through pages filled with coded information and names. Ava's eyes darted from the window to the door, every shadow outside feeling like a threat. You think we're safe here? Lena asked without looking up, her voice casual but laced with tension. Ava gritted her teeth, trying to calm the anxiety clawing at her insides. For now, but not for long. We need to get to the bottom of this quickly. Lena set the file down and turned toward Ava, her face hardening. We don't have much time. The bikers aren't going to let this go. And that boss, whoever he is, we need to find him before he finds us. Ava nodded. The trail was getting colder, but she wasn't about to let it slip through her fingers. The bikers were just one piece of the puzzle. Whoever the boss was, he was the key. If they could take him down, they might just end this nightmare for good. Suddenly, a noise at the door caught her attention. A soft knock, almost imperceptible. Ava tensed, hand immediately going to her gun. But Lena was faster. She was already on her feet, moving to the door with cat-like grace. Ava stayed back, watching every movement, every sound, ready to react in an instant. Lena opened the door just a crack, her eyes flicking to the figure standing in the hallway. Ava's breath caught as she recognized him. Jace, the contact from the biker gang they had been trying to infiltrate. His usual cocky smirk was gone, replaced by an expression of urgency. What are you doing here? Ava asked, her voice low, her hand still hovering over her weapon. Jace glanced nervously down the hallway before stepping inside, shutting the door quickly behind him. We don't have much time, he said in a hushed tone, his eyes darting around the room. You're both in over your heads. Ava exchanged a look with Lena, whose expression remained unreadable. What are you talking about? Lena asked, stepping closer. Jace's eyes were wild, his hands shaking as he held out a small, crumpled envelope. You were right. There's someone pulling the strings, someone bigger than the bikers. I've been digging around, and I found something. Ava stepped forward, her fingers snatching the envelope from his hand. She tore it open, finding a single photo inside. A grainy image of a man in a sharp suit, standing next to a luxury car. He looked out of place in the gritty streets of the city, like he was a puppet master, controlling everything from the shadows. This is the boss? Ava asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jace nodded, his eyes filled with fear. His name's Elias Blackwood. I don't know much about him, but he's untouchable. I've heard whispers that he's got connections all over. Politicians, cops, even higher-ups in the military. Ava studied the photo, her mind already calculating their next move. Blackwood wasn't just another gangster. He was a man with power, with reach. Taking him down wasn't going to be easy. It was going to take everything they had, every ounce of strength, every connection they could muster. I've been running from him for months, Jace continued, his voice cracking. But now I'm stuck. I don't have a choice. You need to help me. Lena stepped closer, her face hardening. What do you want from us? Jace looked at the floor, ashamed. I've been feeding information to the bikers, helping them do whatever they wanted. But I didn't know it was this deep. Blackwood's the one pulling all the strings, and he's not just a criminal mastermind. He's got plans that could change everything. Ava's thoughts raced as she processed Jace's words. They had to move quickly. Blackwood was more dangerous than they had realized. But if they could somehow get close to him, expose his network, everything could unravel. We need to find out more, Ava said, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts in her head. If we're going to take him down, we need to know his next move. Jace hesitated, then nodded. I can get you in, but it's going to take time. Blackwood's operations are locked down tighter than anything I've ever seen. Lena stepped in, her voice firm. We don't have time. Every minute we waste, Blackwood gets further ahead. We need to act now. Ava's gaze shifted between Jace and Lena, a quiet storm brewing in her chest. They were at a crossroads. Time was slipping through their fingers, and every decision was weighted with the possibility of failure. I know where he's meeting tonight, Jace finally said. It's risky, but it's the only chance we've got. I can get you inside. Ava nodded sharply. Then let's move. They didn't wait for another second. Jace led them out of the safe house, taking a back alley to avoid any unwanted attention. The streets were empty, the city quiet, but Ava could feel the tension building, the sense that something big was about to happen. They reached a secluded part of the city, a nondescript building with no signage. Jace pushed open the door and gestured for them to follow. The interior was dark, filled with the smell of old wood and stale air. There was a single staircase leading down into the basement. "This is it," Jace said, his voice barely audible. "Blackwood's men will be here soon. We have to move fast." Ava and Lena exchanged a brief look, their determination reflected in the glint of their eyes. They had no choice but to step into the lion's den. As Ava and Lena descend into the depths of Blackwood's lair, they know that nothing will be the same once they confront the mastermind behind the chaos. Will they be able to outwit him, or will the web he spun tighten around them forever? The dim lights flickered as Ava and Lena entered the underground meeting room, the air thick with tension and the unmistakable scent of danger. The stairs creaked underfoot as they descended into the depths of Blackwood's lair. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the weight of the world was pressing down on them. Jace led the way, his nervous energy palpable, but Ava and Lena stayed focused. This was it, the moment they had been working toward. They had no intention of walking away empty-handed. The door at the bottom of the stairs was unmarked, blending seamlessly with the concrete walls around it. Jace paused, taking a deep breath before pushing it open. The heavy wood groaned on its hinges, revealing a large, stark room. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary meeting space. A long table, a few chairs, and a dimly lit chandelier hanging above. But there was nothing ordinary about it. The table was surrounded by men and women, all dressed in dark suits. Some were leaning in, conversing quietly, while others appeared to be waiting for someone. Ava's eyes flicked over each of them, taking note of every detail, every movement. Her instincts screamed that something was wrong, that this wasn't just a casual meeting. There was an edge to the room, a sense of looming danger that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. As they stepped further inside, the door behind them clicked shut and the conversation ceased. Every eye in the room turned toward them, and the silence was suffocating. "Jace," a deep voice called from the far side of the table. Ava's gaze immediately went to the man who had spoken, Elias Blackwood. He stood with an air of quiet authority, his presence commanding the room without a single word. His dark suit was perfectly tailored, his hair slicked back, and his eyes held a cold, calculating gleam. He looked every bit the part of a man who ran this operation from the shadows. "Well, well, well," Blackwood said, his voice smooth and mocking. "I didn't expect a visit from such distinguished guests. Jace, it seems you've brought more than just information this time." Ava's fingers twitched toward her gun, but she held her ground. She had to be careful. One wrong move, and everything could fall apart. Lena, ever the strategist, stood beside her, eyes scanning the room for potential exits, the shadows, the hidden threats. "I think it's time we get to business," Blackwood continued, his smirk widening. "I've been watching you both. You think you can just waltz in here and take down everything I've built? You've made a very dangerous mistake." Ava's heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. "We're not here to play games, Blackwood," she said, her voice low but steady. "We're here to end this." Blackwood chuckled, the sound like ice scraping across stone. He moved slowly around the table, his gaze never leaving Ava and Lena. "You really think you have a chance? I've been planning this for years. Do you have any idea how deep my reach goes? You're out of your depth." Lena's eyes narrowed. "We've dealt with men like you before. You're not invincible." "Is that so?" Blackwood said, his tone dripping with amusement. "Then why don't you tell me, detective, why you're still standing here? How did you even get past my men?" Ava shot a glance at Jace, who was standing near the door, his hands trembling. The fear was evident in his eyes, but there was something else there now, too, a realization that he had underestimated the women standing before him. "We're not alone," Ava said, her voice calm but cutting. "And you've made the mistake of thinking you're untouchable. You might have your hands in every corner of this city, but you're not invincible. People like you always slip up." Blackwood's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, and Ava saw it, his moment of doubt. He was calculating, assessing them, trying to figure out if they were bluffing. "I'll give you credit," Blackwood said, stepping closer, his voice now dangerously soft. You're brave, but bravery won't save you here. Ava took a deep breath, preparing herself. This was the moment. She couldn't afford to let him control the conversation any longer. You can keep playing games with us, Blackwood, Lena said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Or you can tell us what you're really planning. Because sooner or later, the truth is going to come out, and you're not going to be able to hide from it. The room seemed to freeze as Blackwood's expression shifted, just slightly. His eyes hardened, the coldness returning as his hand drifted to the pocket of his jacket. For a second, it looked like he might pull a weapon, but instead, he pulled out a small envelope, tossing it onto the table between them. Then you better take a look at this, he said, his voice laced with venom, and know that there's no turning back. Ava hesitated, but then reached for the envelope. Inside, she found a series of photographs, grainy images of her and Lena, taken in various locations around the city, seemingly unaware they were being watched. There were even shots of their families, people they cared about, looking unknowing and vulnerable. Blackwood's voice was low and threatening. You think you're here to stop me? You've just walked straight into my trap. Every move you make from now on, I'll be watching. Lena clenched her fists, but Ava held her back with a sharp glance. You think this is over? Ava said, her voice steady, but there was fire behind her words. You've made one fatal mistake, Blackwood. You underestimate us. Blackwood's smirk didn't waver, but there was a flicker of something else, uncertainty. For the first time, Ava felt that she had the upper hand. Blackwood wasn't as untouchable as he thought. Do your worst, Blackwood said, his voice like poison. But you'll regret it. Ava didn't respond immediately. She simply locked eyes with him, steady, unwavering. They had just made the most dangerous move of their lives, but they weren't backing down now. As Blackwood's threat looms over them, Ava and Lena realized the stakes have never been higher. With their families at risk and their every move watched, can they outmaneuver the man who seems to control it all, or will they fall into the trap he set for them? Ava sat in the dimly lit room, the envelope still clutched tightly in her hand, her mind racing with the implications of Blackwood's threat. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the weight of the photographs pressing down on her like a physical force. Every second that passed felt like an eternity, each moment more suffocating than the last. The room around her was silent, too silent, and for the first time in her career, Ava wasn't sure how to proceed. Blackwood had just pulled a card she hadn't expected. He was playing for keeps. Lena, ever the steady presence, sat across from her, her eyes calm but sharp. It was clear she had already started thinking about their next move, though Ava wasn't sure what it was yet. They couldn't afford to make a misstep now. Not when Blackwood had them in his sights. Do you think it's real? Lena asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was low, but it held the kind of certainty that Ava had come to trust. Ava didn't answer right away. She knew that Blackwood had the resources to gather information, to follow them, and to manipulate them. But this felt different. Too personal. Too precise. I don't know, Ava said, her voice tight. But it doesn't matter. He's not the only one who can play dirty. Lena's eyes narrowed as she leaned forward. You're thinking about going after his family, aren't you? Ava nodded. It was dangerous, reckless even. But what other choice did they have? If they were going to break Blackwood's grip on the city, they needed to do more than just play defense. They needed to strike back, and they needed to do it fast. We'll have to move carefully, Ava said, her mind already working through the logistics. We can't let him see us coming. But if we hit him where it hurts, his connections, his personal life, he won't be able to ignore us. Lena's lips curled into a small, calculating smile. I've been meaning to pay a visit to some of his business associates. I think it's time we accelerate that plan. Ava didn't need to ask. Lena had a network of informants, some legal, some not. That could be the key to finding Blackwood's weaknesses. And once they had them, there would be no stopping them. But as she sat there, looking at the photographs once again, a realization hit her hard. Blackwood had shown his hand. But what if this was just the beginning? What if they were already too late? You're right, Ava said, breaking the silence once again. We need to hit him hard. But we also need to make sure our people are safe. The moment Blackwood senses we're a threat, he won't hesitate to go after anyone we care about. Lena's expression softened. We'll protect them. You know that. Ava didn't respond immediately. She trusted Lena more than anyone else in her life, but this was different. Blackwood was a master of manipulation, and if he had already gotten to them, what else was he capable of? What's the next move? Lena asked, bringing Ava back to the present. Ava took a deep breath and stood up, walking over to the window. The city stretched out before her, a sprawling, chaotic mess of lives that she could no longer ignore. She had once believed in doing things by the book, following the rules, staying within the lines. But Blackwood had taken that option away from her. Now, there were no rules, only survival. First, we get Blackwood's associates. Then we find his Achilles heel, Ava said, turning back to face Lena. And when we do, we go in full force. No mercy. Lena nodded, the steel in her eyes reflecting the same resolve that Ava felt burning in her chest. We're in this together. I'll make the calls. You get the information we need. Ava smiled, albeit grimly. Let's make it count. As Ava and Lena prepare to strike back, they know the clock is ticking. Every moment brings them closer to their target, but also deeper into Blackwood's deadly web. Can they outmaneuver him before it's too late? Or will the darkness they're diving into consume them first? Under the buzzing neon lights of the underground club, Ava and Lena stepped into the heart of Blackwood's operation, where the rules of the city didn't apply. The smell of sweat, smoke, and stale alcohol lingered in the air as the two women made their way through the crowd. Music pulsed loudly from the speakers, but the noise only seemed to heighten their focus. In a place like this, every shadow had a story, every face a potential threat, and the only law was survival. Ava could feel the tension in her chest as she scanned the room, every movement calculated, every step measured. Lena was already ahead, her keen eyes scanning the area, looking for any sign of the people they were after. They had tracked Blackwood's business ties here, to this grimy club, a front for the kind of operations that could make or break a city. It was a place where men like Blackwood thrived, untouchable, surrounded by loyalists and willing pawns. Stay sharp, Ava whispered to Lena, her voice barely audible over the noise. We don't know who's watching. Lena gave a slight nod, but Ava could see the fire in her eyes. They were both far beyond the point of playing it safe now. The stakes had escalated, and there was no turning back. The two of them approached the bar, where a man with tattoos covering his arms and neck stood pouring drinks. He looked up as they approached, his gaze lingering for a moment before he nodded, as if expecting them. He was one of Blackwood's lieutenants, a man known only as Marco. Ava leaned in, her tone calm but laced with authority. We need to talk to your boss. Marco's eyes flicked to Lena, then back to Ava, sizing them up. For a moment, Ava wondered if they had walked into a trap, if Blackwood had already anticipated their move. But Marco simply nodded and turned, motioning for them to follow. They followed him deeper into the club, passing by rooms that seemed more like hidden chambers of secrets than places of entertainment. As they approached a door at the back of the building, Marco paused, glancing at them with a smirk. You sure you're ready for this? Blackwood doesn't like to be disturbed. Ava's eyes never left his face. We're not here to ask permission. He pushed the door open without another word, revealing a large, dimly lit office. The man sitting behind the desk was no stranger to Ava. It was Donato, one of Blackwood's most trusted men, known for his cold demeanor and ruthlessness. His eyes were calculating, and his lips barely moved when he spoke. Well, Donato said, his voice low but chilling. If it isn't the detective and her loyal sidekick, to what do I owe the pleasure? Ava didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. We're here to make a deal. You and Blackwood have something we want, and we have something you need. Lena crossed her arms, her stance just as firm. We can make things difficult for him. We're not the ones you want to have on your bad side. Donato's lips curled into a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. You're playing a dangerous game. Blackwood doesn't take kindly to people who think they can outsmart him. Ava's eyes never wavered. Then he'll have to learn the hard way. There was a long pause, the weight of their words hanging in the air like a storm about to break. Donato leaned back in his chair, clearly assessing his options. For a moment, Ava wondered if he was deciding whether to end this right here and now, or if he'd let them play their hand. Finally, he spoke, his tone colder than before. "I'll tell Blackwood you're here. But if you're expecting him to be reasonable, you're wasting your time." Ava gave a single nod, signaling Lena to stay alert. They didn't need his cooperation. They just needed him to keep them alive long enough to get to Blackwood. As they turned to leave the office, Donato's voice stopped them. "Just remember, Detective, Blackwood always gets what he wants. And when he's done with you, there will be nothing left." Ava's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. They were too far in now. No threats would make her back down. Ava and Lena have entered Blackwood's inner circle, but the dangers ahead are more treacherous than they ever imagined. With enemies closing in on all sides, will they manage to stay one step ahead? Or will they become just another casualty in the fight for power? As the doors slammed shut behind them, Ava and Lena were left standing in the dim hallway, the weight of Donato's words sinking in like a stone. The air in the corridor felt heavier now, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Ava could feel the suffocating tension pressing against her chest. She had expected danger, but not this close. Not so quickly. They were in the belly of the beast now, and there was no turning back. Lena was quiet, her sharp eyes scanning the hallway for any movement. They both knew that Blackwood was not a man to be underestimated. His empire stretched far beyond the city, and those who crossed him often disappeared, leaving no trace behind. "We need to move fast," Ava said, her voice low but urgent. "Once he knows we're here, things will escalate. And I don't want to find out how far he'll go to keep his secrets." Lena nodded, her fingers brushing the gun holstered at her waist. "I'm ready when you are. Let's go." They moved swiftly down the hallway, past rooms where muffled voices could be heard. Ava's mind raced as she thought through their next steps. They needed to confront Blackwood, but they couldn't do it recklessly. They had to be strategic, patient. He was dangerous, calculating. He wouldn't give in easily. They reached a stairwell, leading them up to the second floor. From there, they could access Blackwood's private quarters. The security was tighter, the air colder. They could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional footstep from above. They were close. But with every step, the realization grew that Blackwood wouldn't hesitate to make them disappear if they got too close. As they neared the top of the stairs, a door creaked open. Ava froze, instinctively pulling Lena into the shadows. They waited, tense, listening for any signs of movement. The last thing they needed was to be caught off guard. A man in a black suit stepped out of the room, his eyes scanning the corridor. He was one of Blackwood's enforcers, his movements sharp and deliberate. Ava's heart pounded in her chest as the man walked past them, oblivious to their presence. They waited a few more moments before stepping out from their hiding place. "Close call," Lena muttered, a slight edge to her voice. Ava didn't answer. She was too focused on what lay ahead. Every moment counted now. They reached the door to Blackwood's office. The steel frame gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, the weight of the situation pressing down on them both. Ava could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, her hands steady despite the mounting pressure. This was it, the moment they'd been working toward, the moment they'd come for. Ava reached for the handle, but before she could turn it, a voice called from behind them. "You think you're ready for this?" They spun around to find Donato standing at the top of the stairs, his cold eyes locking onto theirs. He had followed them, a calculated move. Ava had known he wouldn't just let them waltz into Blackwood's lair without some sort of resistance. "I don't know what you think you're doing here," Donato continued, his voice low and dangerous. "But this is where you need to turn back. You're out of your depth." Lena stepped forward, her stance defiant. "We didn't come here for a fight, Donato, but if you want one, you've got it." Ava placed a hand on Lena's shoulder, signaling her to hold back. "We're not here to start trouble. We're here for Blackwood. You're just in the way." Donato's lips curled into a smile, though it was anything but friendly. "You're both bold, I'll give you that. But I've seen too many people like you. They come in, they think they can change things, but in the end, they're just another casualty in Blackwood's war." Ava's jaw tightened. "I'm not like the others." Donato raised an eyebrow. No, you're not. But that's the problem. Blackwood doesn't deal with people who don't know their place. With a quick motion, Donato stepped aside, revealing two other men behind him. Enforcers. Ava's instincts flared. She could tell from the way they moved that they weren't just muscle. They were trained. Dangerous. Get out of our way, Donato, Lena snapped, her eyes narrowing. Donato said nothing, but the message was clear. He wasn't going to back down, and neither were they. It was only a matter of time before things escalated. The tension in the air thickened, and Ava could feel the pressure building. She knew there was no walking away from this. Ava reached for her gun, but Donato's voice stopped her. You want to make it out of here alive? He said, his tone suddenly more serious. Then listen to me. You're playing a game you can't win. Blackwood doesn't lose. And if you want any chance of walking away, you'll do what he says. Ava met Donato's gaze, unwavering. I don't take orders from men like you. Donato's eyes flicked to Lena, then back to Ava. Then you'll die like the others. With that, the air crackled with tension. The fight had begun. Ava and Lena have reached the final stage of their mission, but now they're faced with a choice. Fight their way through Blackwood's enforcers or surrender to a fate worse than death. The clock is ticking, and every decision could be their last. The sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway, sharp and deliberate, as Ava and Lena made their move. There was no turning back now. The tension in the air was almost palpable. Ava's heart raced, the adrenaline fueling every step. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Either take the risk or face the consequences of inaction. There was no middle ground. Donato's warning still lingered in her mind, but she pushed it aside. She had come too far to back down now. Blackwood needed to be stopped. His empire of corruption, lies, and violence had grown too powerful. It was time to take him down, no matter the cost. Get ready, Ava whispered to Lena, her voice low but firm. We don't know what's waiting for us behind that door, but we'll face it together. Lena nodded without a word. There was no need for further discussion. The trust between them was implicit. They had been through too much already. This was their final push, the culmination of everything they had fought for. With a swift movement, Ava kicked the door to Blackwood's office open. The hinges groaned in protest as they burst into the room, guns drawn, eyes scanning for any sign of movement. The room was lavish, opulent even, designed to intimidate and command respect. But Ava was beyond caring for its luxury. It was a symbol of everything Blackwood represented, and she intended to tear it down. At the center of the room stood Blackwood, his tall frame silhouetted against the massive windows overlooking the city. He was calm, composed, as if he had been expecting them. I was wondering when you'd make your move, Blackwood said, his voice smooth like velvet, but cold as ice. He didn't even flinch as they entered, his eyes never leaving them. Ava's grip tightened around her gun. It's over, Blackwood. Your empire ends today. Blackwood chuckled, a low, almost amused sound. You think you can just waltz in here and destroy everything I've built? You have no idea what you're up against. Lena's eyes narrowed. We're not afraid of you, Blackwood. He turned slowly, walking toward his desk with deliberate steps. You should be, he said. I've played this game for too long. And now, you two have walked right into my trap. Ava's stomach churned with realization. They had walked right into it. Donato's earlier words echoed in her mind, but it was too late to retreat. This was the moment they'd been working toward, and they couldn't let fear control them now. Your game's over, Ava said, her voice steady, though her heart pounded in her chest. We're taking you down. Blackwood's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing. I think you're mistaken, he said coldly, his hand moving toward a button hidden beneath his desk. This is just the beginning. Before Ava could react, the sound of a loud click echoed in the room, followed by the distinct hum of security systems engaging. The doors they had come through slammed shut, locking them in. The walls seemed to vibrate with the sudden surge of energy. Blackwood's security had been activated, and they were trapped. Lena's hand shot to her gun, but Ava stopped her with a sharp look. No time. We need to move. They darted for cover behind a set of plush chairs, the sound of heavy machinery clicking and whirring around them. Ava's mind raced as she considered their options. They could hear the faint sound of footsteps approaching from the hallway, reinforcements. Blackwood was clearly prepared for this moment. Ava's eyes flicked to Lena. "We need to disable the security systems. Now." Lena nodded and sprinted toward the control panel at the far end of the room. Ava covered her, her eyes scanning for any signs of movement. The seconds felt like hours. She could hear Blackwood's voice, muffled through the walls, speaking into a hidden intercom. Whatever he was planning, it wasn't good. Lena reached the panel and immediately began typing furiously, her fingers flying over the keys as she hacked into the system. Ava kept her gun raised, watching for any sign of danger. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she didn't allow herself to panic. "Not yet. Come on, Lena," Ava muttered under her breath. "We don't have much time." Just as she said the words, the door to the office burst open, and two of Blackwood's enforcers rushed in. They were armed and ready. But before they could get a shot off, Ava fired. The first man dropped to the ground, his body jerking from the impact. The second man hesitated for just a moment, but that was all Lena needed. With a quick flick of her wrist, she disabled the security system, and the walls stopped vibrating. The locks on the doors released. Ava didn't wait for them to regroup. She ran toward the door, gun raised, Lena close behind her. But just as they were about to leave, Blackwood's voice rang out, stopping them in their tracks. "You think you've won?" he sneered. "You're nothing. You'll never take me down. I'll destroy everything you love. You're playing a game you can't win." Ava turned to face him one last time. Her voice was steady, her gaze unwavering. "You'll see, Blackwood. This ends now." With that, she and Lena bolted through the open door, out into the hallway, ready for whatever came next. The battle has only just begun. With Blackwood's threat still hanging over them, Ava and Lena must fight their way out of the building and confront the final pieces of the puzzle. The stakes have never been higher. Will they make it out alive, or will Blackwood's empire crush them before they can escape? Ava's breath came in short gasps, each step taking her deeper into the chaos she had fought so hard to avoid. The dim hallway felt like a labyrinth, and every corner turn seemed to bring new danger. Ava's eyes flicked to Lena, who was keeping pace with her despite the strain, her face set in grim determination. They had just narrowly escaped Blackwood's grasp, but they both knew that was only the beginning. The trap was still set. The question now was how to get to the heart of it without falling victim to it. "Any ideas?" Lena asked, her voice low, barely audible over the pounding of their hearts. Ava glanced at the emergency stairwell just ahead. It was their best shot, but getting there would mean dealing with whatever else Blackwood had prepared for them. "We stick together. We head for the roof. We can get to the ground level from there. It's the only way out." Lena didn't hesitate. They both knew they didn't have time to think. They were moving targets, and every second that passed was another opportunity for Blackwood's men to catch up with them. Ava could already hear the footsteps behind them, growing closer by the second. "We need to move faster," Lena urged, her hand hovering near the holster of her gun. "They're closing in." Ava nodded, pushing her pace despite the tightness in her chest. She could feel the weight of the gun in her hand, the cool metal offering some comfort, but it wouldn't be enough to save them if they didn't escape soon. She took a deep breath, mentally preparing herself for what lay ahead. Just as they neared the stairwell, a sharp cry echoed from behind them. Ava turned instinctively, her fingers tightening around her weapon. The sound of more footsteps, faster, heavier this time, rang out as a group of armed men sprinted toward them. Ava didn't wait. She pushed Lena ahead of her, taking up the rear. "Go now." Lena didn't need any more urging. She dashed through the stairwell door, and Ava followed closely behind, their footsteps echoing as they descended rapidly. They were now deep in the heart of Blackwood's compound, but Ava had a plan. She just had to make it to the roof before they were cornered. The air felt heavier with every passing floor. Ava could feel the walls closing in on them. There was no turning back. This was it. She didn't know if they would make it out alive, but she knew that she couldn't let Blackwood win. Not after everything he had done. They reached the roof in record time, and for a moment, there was silence. The chaos below seemed to pause, as though the world was holding its breath. Ava surveyed the area, taking in the harsh city skyline. She knew they couldn't stay there long. Blackwood would be sending men up after them, and when they did, they'd be ready for an all-out assault. Ava turned to Lena. We need a way out. Now. Lena scanned the area, eyes darting from one corner of the roof to the next. Then, she spotted it. A single helicopter pad in the distance, perched on the building next to theirs. It was their best shot. That way, Lena said, pointing. We'll make it. There's a helicopter on the other roof. If we can get there. Before she could finish, a shout rang out from below. Ava's heart skipped a beat. Blackwood's men were closing in. They had to move, and fast. Lena didn't hesitate. She grabbed Ava's arm and pulled her toward the edge of the roof. They could hear the sounds of running footsteps below them, too many to count. The adrenaline was flooding Ava's system as they sprinted across the rooftop, the wind whipping through her hair. They reached the edge and saw the narrow gap between the buildings. It seemed impossible. One wrong step and they would fall. But there was no other choice. They had to jump. Ready? Lena asked, glancing at Ava. Ava didn't answer at first. She only nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. With a deep breath, they both ran forward, leaping across the gap with everything they had. For a split second, Ava thought they weren't going to make it, but then her hands found purchase on the edge of the next building. She pulled herself up, her arms burning with the effort. Lena was right behind her, equally determined to make it. They didn't stop. Not until they reached the helicopter pad, where the sound of rotors filled the air. The pilot, a man with a hardened look, was already revving the engine, ready to get them out of there. They didn't waste a second. They climbed aboard, weapons at the ready. As the helicopter lifted off, Ava looked down at the chaos below. Blackwood's men were still on the ground, searching, but it was too late. They were beyond his reach now. But even as they flew higher, Ava couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Blackwood wouldn't give up so easily. He had too much at stake. But for now, they had one. Ava turned to Lena, who was catching her breath, a relieved smile on her face. We made it, Lena said, her voice quiet but full of triumph. Ava nodded, but her mind was already racing, formulating a plan for what would come next. This is just the beginning. Blackwood won't stop until he's destroyed everything. But we're not backing down. Not now. Now that Ava and Lena have escaped Blackwood's compound, the battle for the city has only intensified. As they regroup and plan their next move, the stakes are higher than ever. Blackwood's empire is still standing, and his wrath is far from over. Will Ava and Lena be able to outsmart him and bring him down once and for all? Or will the power of his network crush them before they can succeed? Ava stared out the helicopter window, watching the city below. A city she once called home, now a war zone she had to reclaim. The helicopter cut through the sky like a blade, the noise deafening in their ears. Ava's grip on the seat tightened as she tried to steady her racing thoughts. The escape had been too easy, and that made her uneasy. Blackwood wasn't the type to let things slip through his fingers without a fight. He'd be plotting their downfall already. Lena glanced over at her, her brow furrowed. You're quiet. What's on your mind? Ava turned to her, the weight of the question pressing down on her. I'm not sure we're out of the woods yet. Blackwood's going to want revenge, and we've just given him more reason to come after us. Lena nodded, her expression grim. I know, but we've got the upper hand for now. We know where he's been hiding. We know his people, and we have enough to bring him down. Ava hesitated. She wanted to believe that, wanted to feel like they were closer to ending this, but something about Lena's words didn't sit right with her. Blackwood's empire was too vast. If they were going to bring him down, they needed more than just the right information. They needed an army. They were flying toward a secluded warehouse now. One of Lena's contacts had told her about it. It was supposed to be a safe house, a place to regroup, to plan their next move. But Ava couldn't shake the feeling that it was just another trap. They were being pulled into the spider's web, and the closer they got, the more she could sense the danger. As they landed, the door to the warehouse swung open, and a tall figure stepped out, silhouetted by the harsh light behind them. Ava's hand instinctively went to her gun, but Lena's voice stopped her. It's Michael, Lena said, her tone laced with relief. Michael. Ava had heard the name before. He was a former soldier, one who had fought alongside Lena in the past. He was supposed to be their ally, but Ava had learned the hard way that loyalty was a rare thing these days. Michael's face was shadowed, his expression unreadable. He stepped toward them as the helicopter blades slowed to a stop. "We've got company," he said simply. "Blackwood's people are already closing in. They know you're here." Ava's heart skipped a beat. It was exactly what she had feared. How long until they arrive? Michael glanced at his watch, his jaw tight. "They're already on their way. I'd say less than 15 minutes. Lena moved quickly, grabbing Ava by the arm and pulling her inside the warehouse. "We don't have much time. We need to lock down this place and figure out our next move." Ava nodded, but something gnawed at her gut. This was too easy. Blackwood had been tracking them for longer than they realized. He knew where they were, what they were doing. The question was, how? Inside the warehouse, Michael led them to a small, secure room with computers and monitors. It was a makeshift command center, hastily put together but functional. A few of Michael's men were already there, working quickly to gather information. "We've got intel on Blackwood's next move," Michael said, turning to the screens. "He's not just coming after you two. He's mobilizing his entire network. We need to hit him first, or he'll hit us." Ava stepped closer to the monitor, her eyes scanning the information. "Where is he now?" Michael pointed to a location on the map. "This is one of his safe houses, high security, practically impenetrable. We could go in, take him by surprise, but it's risky. He's expecting us now." Ava's mind raced. She could already hear the hum of tension in the air, the sense that the walls were closing in on them again. They had to make a choice, and fast. "We take the fight to him," Ava said, her voice sharp and commanding. "We don't wait for him to make the first move." Lena nodded, her face hardening with resolve. "Agreed. We hit him where it hurts. We cripple his operations, and we do it before he has a chance to retaliate." Ava could see the weight of the decision settling on Lena's shoulders, but there was no going back. They were already in too deep. If they didn't strike now, they would be the ones on the receiving end of Blackwood's wrath. Ava turned to Michael. "Get your men ready. We move out in 5. He hesitated, his face clouded with doubt. "You sure about this, Ava? Blackwood's network isn't something you just walk into. He has resources. People loyal to him, dangerous people. He won't hesitate to kill anyone who stands in his way." Ava's eyes locked onto his. "I've faced worse. We've faced worse. And I'm not backing down now." Michael seemed to consider this for a moment, then nodded. "All right, we move on your signal." As they geared up and prepared to leave the warehouse, Ava couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading straight into the lion's den. But there was no turning back now. They had to do this, not just for themselves but for everyone Blackwood had hurt along the way. The storm was coming, and Ava knew they had to be the ones to weather it. As Ava, Lena, and Michael prepare to storm Blackwood's stronghold, the stakes are higher than ever. Every move they make could be their last. Will they manage to dismantle Blackwood's operation before it's too late? Or will they fall victim to the very trap they're trying to escape? The roar of the engine drowned out everything else, every thought, every fear, every whisper of doubt that tried to worm its way into Ava's mind. The convoy sped through the winding streets, the night air biting at their skin as they neared Blackwood's compound. Ava's heart raced in her chest, each beat a reminder of what was at stake. This wasn't just a raid. This was their chance to end this nightmare once and for all. Lena was beside her in the lead vehicle, her eyes locked on the road, her face a mask of determination. Michael and his team flanked them in armored jeeps, each one carrying enough firepower to take down a small army. Ava didn't need to ask. They were ready for war. She gripped the seat, fighting the urge to glance over her shoulder. Every instinct told her they were being watched, that someone was waiting for them to make a mistake. Blackwood's network had eyes everywhere. They couldn't afford to be careless. "We're almost there," Lena said, her voice low but steady. "Stay sharp." Ava nodded, her jaw clenched. They had trained for this, prepared for every possible scenario. Yet the closer they got to the compound, the more the tension mounted. She had no illusions about what they were walking into. This place was a fortress. If Blackwood didn't want them here, they wouldn't get past the gates. The convoy rounded a corner, and the compound came into view. A sprawling estate surrounded by high walls and heavy security. Floodlights blazed across the grounds, and Ava could make out figures patrolling the perimeter. A typical setup for someone like Blackwood. But tonight, it would be their undoing. "Hold position," Michael's voice crackled through their comms. "We need to approach from the west. The north entrance is too heavily fortified." Ava's hand tightened on the radio, her pulse quickening. She could feel the eyes of the enemy, even from this distance. The calm before the storm. She hated it. She wanted to be in the action, not waiting like this. But she knew better than to rush in blindly. Minutes felt like hours as they crept closer, the convoy slowly threading its way through narrow streets, making sure they didn't alert anyone to their presence. It wasn't until they reached the west side of the compound that they stopped. "We're in position," Michael confirmed. "Get ready." Ava's breath came in shallow gasps as she prepared to disembark. The weight of her vest felt heavier now, and her thoughts narrowed to a single goal: take down Blackwood. If they succeeded, they could finally bring an end to the terror he had spread. If they failed, she pushed that thought aside. There was no room for failure. Not tonight. The team moved quickly, their steps quiet against the ground as they approached the compound's outer walls. The guards weren't expecting them yet, but that wouldn't last. They had to be swift, decisive. Ava turned to Lena, who gave her a nod of approval. They knew what needed to be done. Without a word, they moved into the shadows, heading toward a small security outpost near the rear of the compound. A few muffled shots later, and the guards were down. No alarms, no noise. Just the way it needed to be. The door to the building was locked, but Lena's swift movements made short work of it. They stepped inside, guns raised, the air thick with anticipation. This was the heart of Blackwood's operation. If they were going to succeed, they had to take control of this place, and fast. "We've got a few minutes before anyone notices we're here," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to hit the server room first. That's where all the intel is stored. If we can get access, we can cripple his network." Ava nodded. "Then that's our first target." The group moved with purpose, their footsteps muffled against the cold concrete floor. The building seemed empty, but Ava knew better than to trust the silence. Every corner was a potential danger. They reached the server room, and Lena quickly disabled the security system. Ava's heart raced as the door slid open, revealing rows of computers and monitors, Blackwood's private database. "Get to work," she ordered. "We can't afford to waste any more time." The team set to work, tapping away at the machines. But as Ava glanced at the door, something caught her eye, a shadow moving in the hallway. She held up a hand, signaling everyone to freeze. "Someone's coming," she whispered, her heart hammering in her chest. They had to move. Fast. Lena was the first to react, pulling a small explosive charge from her pack and planting it on the door. They had seconds before the guards arrived. Ava turned to Michael. "Evacuate the data, now." Michael worked furiously, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The seconds felt like an eternity as the door began to creak under the pressure of the approaching footsteps. "Almost there," Michael muttered, his voice tense. Ava's hand went to her gun. She could hear the guards now, just outside. The sound of boots on concrete. They were running out of time. "Now," she barked. With a final keystroke, Michael hit enter, and the data began to download. Just as the door burst open, they ducked behind the computer consoles. Gunfire erupted in the room, the sharp crack of bullets ricocheting off the walls. Ava returned fire, her shots precise, cutting down the first guard through the door. But there were more, and they were closing in. Lena threw a flashbang, and the room exploded in a brilliant white light. For a moment, everything went quiet. Ava's vision blurred, but she kept her finger on the trigger, scanning the room for movement. "Move," Michael shouted, grabbing the hard drives as he ran toward the exit. They were out of time. Ava and Lena sprinted after him, the sound of gunfire still ringing in their ears. They were almost to the exit when another wave of Blackwood's men appeared. This time, they were ready. Ava raised her gun, adrenaline pumping. "Get down!" she shouted as she dove to the side, narrowly avoiding a barrage of bullets. They had to get out of here. But Blackwood wasn't going to make it easy. The walls were closing in, and Ava knew that escaping Blackwood's compound would be harder than getting in. With the data secured, they had what they came for. But would they make it out alive? The next move was up to them. Everything slowed down as Ava's heart pounded in her chest, the chaos around her a blur, her focus narrowing to only one thing: get out. The door to the rear exit slammed shut behind them, but it wasn't enough to block the sound of boots pounding the ground in pursuit. Ava's pulse hammered in her ears as she sprinted through the corridor, her breath shallow but steady. She didn't need to look back to know the enemy was right on their heels. "Move," Lena barked, grabbing Ava's arm and pulling her toward the fire exit. The plan was simple: grab the data, take out the guards, and get the hell out. But nothing had gone as planned. Blackwood's men were everywhere, and they'd barely made it to the server room without a fight. The team had to move faster now than ever before. The fire escape was their only chance. High above the compound, it offered a way out, but it was also a death trap. The roof would be their only escape route, and from there, they could call for extraction. But the clock was ticking, and every second mattered. Ava glanced to her left. Michael and his team were close behind, but the sounds of shouting and gunfire told her they were in trouble. "Go. I'll cover you," Ava shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Lena hesitated but nodded. She shoved Ava ahead of her, her own gun raised, and the two of them pushed through the narrow hallway. Behind them, more guards appeared, their footsteps growing louder as they got closer. "Get to the roof," Michael shouted from behind them. "We're not far behind." Ava didn't waste another second. They reached the door to the fire escape, but before they could open it, a blast of gunfire rang out, and the door exploded open in a shower of splinters. Ava and Lena dove to the ground, narrowly avoiding the hail of bullets. Lena fired back, her shots hitting their mark, but the guards kept coming. They were relentless. Ava pulled herself up, grabbing Lena's hand and pulling her toward the escape door. "Now!" she yelled, slamming her shoulder into the door. The doors swung open, and the two women scrambled onto the fire escape, their boots ringing against the metal steps. They could hear the guards shouting behind them, but they didn't stop. They couldn't afford to. The stairs creaked under their weight as they ascended, each step bringing them closer to the roof. But just as they reached the top, a blast of gunfire shattered the silence, and Ava felt the impact on her shoulder. She gasped, stumbling but managing to catch herself against the railing. "Damn it!" she hissed, her teeth gritted in pain. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Lena turned to her, eyes wide with concern. "Ava, I'm fine," Ava snapped, even though the blood soaking her sleeve told a different story. She kept moving, each step slower than the last. But she kept moving. There was no choice now. They reached the roof, where Michael and his team were already waiting. The extraction point was a few blocks away, but they had no idea how much time they had before reinforcements arrived. Ava reached the roof's edge, her eyes scanning the area below. The black SUV that was supposed to be their extraction was nowhere in sight. "They're coming. Move it," Michael shouted, his voice cutting through the panic in her head. Ava's mind raced. They had no choice now. They couldn't wait for the SUV. They had to take what they could get. She turned to Lena. "We need to get down there. Now." But before Lena could respond, a blast of gunfire rang out, and Ava felt herself thrown forward, her legs buckling beneath her as the world went dark. Ava's body hit the ground hard, the world spinning as she struggled to stay conscious. But in the chaos, she saw the shadow of a figure closing in, someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Was this the end of the line for them, or would they find a way to survive? Pain shot through Ava's side, but it was the sight of the figure standing over her that made her freeze, heart thundering in her chest. Ava blinked, her vision hazy. She was sprawled on the cold rooftop, the gunfire ringing in her ears like an echo from a distant nightmare. For a moment, she thought it was the end, until she saw the figure above her, tall, broad-shouldered, and unmistakably dangerous. It was the last person she ever expected to see, and yet there he was, Alex Blackwood. "You're still alive," Blackwood said, his voice laced with dark amusement. "I must admit, I'm impressed. Ava gritted her teeth, trying to push herself up, but the pain in her side stopped her. She glanced at Lena, who was kneeling on the ground, already firing back at the guards closing in from the stairwell. You won't get away with this, Ava spat, forcing the words past the bitter taste in her mouth. Her blood was soaking through her shirt, but she refused to show weakness. Not now. Blackwood's lips curled into a smile. Who said I was trying to get away? I'm just here to watch the show. His presence was like a shadow over her, and for the first time since this mission began, Ava felt truly cornered. The feeling of being hunted, with no way out, made her stomach churn. I should have known you were behind this, she muttered, her fingers trembling as she tried to reach for her gun, but Blackwood was already stepping closer, blocking her every move. You know, Ava, he continued, his tone casual, I never thought it would be you. But then again, I never thought you'd make it this far. You're just like the rest of them, too loyal for your own good. But loyalty's a dangerous thing, don't you think? Ava's heart raced as the world seemed to tilt. Every instinct in her screamed to fight back, to find a way out. But Blackwood's presence was suffocating, and she could feel her strength fading. He was too powerful, too dangerous. But then, as if by some miracle, she heard the familiar roar of engines in the distance, too far to be of any use, but the sound was enough to ignite a spark of hope. Ava, get up, Lena shouted, her voice sharp and urgent. The distraction was enough. Ava rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding Blackwood's boot as he lunged toward her. Her hand finally found her gun, and she raised it, pointing it straight at Blackwood. For a heartbeat, everything froze. I wouldn't do that, Blackwood said, his smirk never leaving his face. You wouldn't want to waste your last bullet on me. Ava's breath caught in her throat, the weight of his words sinking in. She could see the black SUV now, skidding to a stop across the street. Her heart skipped a beat. There was no way they were getting out of here. The guards were closing in on them, and every second mattered. The gun felt heavy in her hand, but she wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Ava squeezed the trigger, but Blackwood was already moving. As the gunshot echoed across the rooftop, Ava's world collapsed into chaos. Was it the end for her, or had she just given herself one last chance to survive? The bullet missed its mark, but it was the explosion that followed that saved Ava's life. Ava's shot went wide, but before Blackwood could react, a deafening blast ripped through the air. The rooftop trembled as debris rained down around them. The explosion was so powerful that it threw Blackwood backward, sending him crashing into the concrete barrier. For a split second, Ava was stunned, her ears ringing, her vision blurred from the blast. Lena didn't hesitate. She pulled Ava to her feet, her grip strong and steady. Move now. Without another word, Ava staggered, blood seeping through her clothes, and ran beside Lena as they headed toward the stairwell. The sound of gunfire rang out again, but it wasn't aimed at them. Someone else was engaging the remaining guards, someone who had come to their rescue. Who's coming? Ava asked, trying to steady her breath as they descended the stairs. Lena didn't look back. We'll find out soon enough. But we can't stop now. They reached the ground floor, where chaos reigned. The sound of shouting, the crackle of radio static, and the rapid fire of weapons told Ava everything she needed to know. A full-blown battle was unfolding. Get to the van, Lena ordered, her eyes scanning the area. She was already moving, but Ava's body felt as if it was made of stone, the weight of exhaustion pulling her down with every step. They made it outside, but the sight of the van was like a beacon in the darkness. Ava pushed herself forward, ignoring the agony in her side. She could hear footsteps behind them, too many to count, but she didn't dare look. Her focus was fixed on the van and the promise of escape. As they reached the vehicle, Lena threw open the door, motioning for Ava to get inside. Just as Ava was about to climb in, a figure stepped out from the shadows, a man she hadn't expected to see again. Alex. Ava gasped, barely able to believe her eyes. He stood there, tall and silent, his expression unreadable. His clothes were torn, his face marked with dirt and blood, but there was a dangerous calm about him. He wasn't here to help. Not anymore. I wouldn't get in that van if I were you, Alex said, his voice colder than it had ever been. You're going to want to listen to me, Ava. It's over. Lena stepped forward, her gun raised, but Ava stopped her. No, don't shoot. Alex's lips twitched, almost as if he was amused. You think I've come to kill you? No, I've come to give you a choice. Ava's heart pounded as she weighed her options. She could see the other men, now pouring out of the shadows, surrounding them on all sides. No matter how fast they ran, there was no way they could outrun this. They were trapped. Choice. Lena's voice was laced with disbelief. What the hell are you talking about? Alex looked at Ava, his eyes dark with regret. I know what you're thinking, Ava. You think I betrayed you. But I didn't. I'm offering you a way out. Ava clenched her fists. You're offering us a way out? After everything? You're with Blackwood, aren't you? For a moment, Alex didn't speak, and Ava's pulse quickened. She could hear the sound of the van's engine starting in the distance. The rescue squad was getting closer, but they were running out of time. I'm not with him, Alex finally said, his voice low. But he knows too much. I had to do what I did to protect you. And now you need to make a choice. Come with me, and I'll get you out of here. Or stay, and face the consequences of your decisions. Ava felt her chest tighten. Every instinct told her to fight, to keep going. But something in Alex's voice stopped her. He was telling the truth, or at least part of it. If she didn't listen, they were all dead. Lena, Ava said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Get in the van. Lena hesitated, but Ava didn't give her time to argue. She climbed into the van, staring back at Alex one last time. He didn't follow, but his gaze lingered on her, an unreadable expression on his face. The van door slammed shut, and the engine roared to life. Ava's pulse raced as they sped down the alley, leaving the chaos behind. But in her gut, she knew the battle wasn't over. Not yet. Would following Alex lead them to safety, or was this just another trap? Ava had made her choice, but only time would tell if it was the right one. The van screeched to a halt as the unmistakable sound of a helicopter overhead sent Ava's heart into overdrive. Ava's eyes flicked to Lena, who was gripping the seat in front of her, her jaw clenched with frustration. The sudden noise above them only deepened the dread that had been mounting in Ava's chest. They weren't alone. Don't stop, Ava ordered, voice trembling. Keep going. Lena glanced at her, her face a mix of concern and resolve. There's nowhere to go, Ava. We're in the middle of a war zone. Ava's gaze locked on the rearview mirror, where the flashing lights of military vehicles could be seen approaching in the distance. Blackwood had seen everything. This was no longer a simple escape. It was a race for survival. We've got to trust Alex, Ava said, though the words felt like acid in her mouth. Trust him? After everything he had done? But the look in his eyes before they left had told her something. Something she couldn't ignore. Lena didn't reply. Her hands tightened on the wheel, her foot pressing the gas harder, urging the van forward as it swerved through narrow streets. Suddenly, the van jerked violently to the left, narrowly missing a roadblock of overturned cars. Tires screamed in protest, and Ava was thrown against the side of the van, a sharp pain shooting through her ribs. Damn it! Lena cursed, her hands steady on the wheel despite the chaos around them. We're too exposed. Ava's pulse spiked as a dark figure on a motorcycle revved its engine, zipping past them and cutting off their path. The biker was only one of many, and Ava knew they wouldn't stop until they had them. We're being hunted, she said, her voice cold with realization. Look out! Lena yelled, swerving the van to avoid a barrage of bullets that struck the side mirror, sending it flying into the night. Just keep driving, Ava shouted, her voice rising above the chaos. She grabbed for the seatbelt, pulling it tightly around her body. We need to get to that safe house. Alex will be there. As the van careened down the street, the helicopter hovered overhead, its spotlight scanning the area. Ava's heart raced in her chest. It was only a matter of time before they found them, before Blackwood found them. Then, ahead, in the distance, a figure appeared. It was Alex, standing in the middle of the road, his stance relaxed, as if he knew the van would be coming. Lena slammed the brakes just in time, bringing the van to a screeching halt mere feet from him. Ava's breath caught in her throat as Alex leaned down to open the door. "What the hell is going on?" Lena demanded, her hands still gripping the steering wheel. "Why are they all over us?" Alex didn't answer immediately. He looked at Ava, his gaze colder than she'd ever seen it. "I told you this wouldn't be easy," he said flatly. "But now, we don't have a choice." Ava's stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "Blackwood was only the beginning," Alex replied. "He's not the one pulling the strings. Not anymore. You've been a pawn in a game much bigger than you think." The words hit her like a freight train. "What are you saying? Who is behind all of this?" Alex didn't respond right away. Instead, he motioned for them to follow him. "We need to move now. I'll explain later. Trust me, Ava. You don't want to stay here." Lena shot Ava a questioning look, but Ava's mind was spinning. Trust Alex again? After everything that had happened? But she knew, deep down, they had no choice. The helicopters, the motorcycles, it was too much. If they stayed, they'd all die. "Let's go," Ava said, unbuckling her seatbelt and pushing open the van door. She stepped out onto the pavement, the night air thick with tension, and followed Alex into the shadows. They ran down an alley, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Behind them, the van's engine roared to life, and Ava could hear the distant sound of the helicopter closing in. They were running out of time. As they reached the safe house, a small, nondescript building hidden between two larger warehouses, Alex turned to them, his face grim. "We're here. But you need to understand something. The people after us, they don't stop. Not until they have you." Ava's breath hitched in her throat. "Who are they?" Alex looked at her, his eyes dark. "The Syndicate, and they don't play by any rules." Would they survive the coming storm, or would the Syndicate's reach be too much to overcome? Ava's decision now had consequences she couldn't yet fathom. The cold, steel doors slammed shut behind them, and for a moment, the silence inside the safe house was more suffocating than the chaos they had just escaped. Ava stepped further into the dimly lit room, her eyes scanning every corner for any sign of danger. The place looked deserted, except for the faint hum of an old refrigerator in the corner and the heavy scent of dust and stale air. It felt like a place where hope went to die. Alex locked the door behind them, his back to it as he took a deep breath. "This is as safe as it gets for now," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Lena, already pacing the room, shot him a skeptical look. "I hope you're right, because I've had enough of running." Ava couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to leave, but there was nowhere to go. The Syndicate was closing in, and Blackwood's men wouldn't rest until they found them. "What the hell is the Syndicate?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Who are they, Alex? You've got to tell me everything." Alex took a step closer to her, his eyes momentarily softening, but there was no warmth in his gaze. "They're not just a criminal organization. They're a shadow network, operating in the background, pulling the strings in ways you can't even begin to understand. Governments, businesses, law enforcement, they have their hands in everything. And you've been caught in the middle of it." Ava felt her stomach churn. Caught in the middle? She looked over at Lena, who had stopped pacing and was now watching Alex closely. "You've known about them the entire time?" Alex nodded. "I didn't have a choice. I thought if I could get close enough to Blackwood, I could bring them down. But I was wrong. The Syndicate doesn't let anyone walk away once they're involved." Ava clenched her fists. "Then why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you tell me?" Alex's jaw tightened, and for the first time, his composure seemed to crack. "Because I couldn't risk it. I thought I could protect you. But I was wrong. I couldn't even protect myself." The weight of his words hung in the air, thick with unspoken regret. Ava felt a cold sweat break out on her skin, the truth starting to sink in. They weren't just fighting for their lives anymore. They were fighting a war that had been planned long before they ever crossed paths with Blackwood. Lena crossed her arms, her voice low. "So, now what? We just sit here and wait for them to come for us?" Alex shook his head. "No, we fight back. We take the fight to them." Ava raised an eyebrow. "How do we even do that? They've got the resources to wipe us off the map. You don't fight them head-on, Alex said, walking over to a table in the center of the room and spreading out a series of maps and files. We go after their assets. We disrupt their operations, expose them for who they really are. Lena leaned in to examine the documents. This looks like a suicide mission. How do you even know where to start? Alex's eyes met hers. I've been tracking them for years. I know how they operate, but we need to act quickly. We've already been compromised. Ava watched the intensity in Alex's eyes as he continued, his voice steady but urgent. If we don't take them down, they'll finish what they started with Blackwood. And worse, if they get to you, Ava, he trailed off, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. The room grew colder as Ava processed his words. Her heart pounded in her chest. The syndicate wasn't just after her. They were after everything she had fought for. The life she had built, the people she cared about, everything was on the line. You're right, she said, her voice more resolute than she felt. We can't wait around to be hunted. We need to hit them first. But we'll need more than just intel. We need power, weapons, allies, anything we can get. Alex's lips twisted into a grim smile. That's the plan. I've got contacts who can help, but we need to move fast. They know we're here, and they won't stop until they find us. Lena pulled out her phone, her eyes flicking between the screen and Alex. What's the plan? Who do we need to contact? Alex hesitated, then nodded. There's a safe house in the city. I've been in touch with an old ally, someone who has the resources to help us. But we'll need to go now, before they realize where we are. Ava felt a rush of adrenaline course through her veins. It was now or never. The fight for survival wasn't over, and she wasn't about to let it end with her running and hiding. I'm in, she said, her voice unwavering. Let's take them down. Lena stood beside her, nodding firmly. Count me in too. Alex stared at them both for a moment before he finally spoke. Then we need to move fast. Get ready. The fight was only beginning, but Ava knew that every step they took from here would either bring them closer to victory or closer to their graves. The car's engine roared to life, cutting through the stillness of the night, as they sped toward the unknown with only one goal in mind: survival. Ava could feel her heart pounding in her chest as the city lights blurred past them. The weight of what they were about to do pressed heavily on her shoulders. Every moment they spent in motion brought them closer to a confrontation they couldn't afford to lose. They had no guarantees, no backup, just a single contact who might be their only hope. Alex's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his knuckles white under the pressure. The streets were empty, the kind of emptiness that made Ava's skin crawl. It wasn't just the lack of cars, it was the absence of any sense of normalcy. They were being hunted, and the world felt like a trap closing in around them. Lena, in the passenger seat, stared ahead, her jaw clenched. How much farther? She asked, breaking the silence. A few minutes, Alex replied, his voice tight with focus. I've used this route before. No one should know about it. Ava turned her attention to the back window, scanning for any sign of danger. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, like they were being followed by ghosts, or worse, hunters. They didn't have the luxury of time. The syndicate would be tracking their every move, and the further they ventured into unknown territory, the higher the risk. Do you trust this contact? Ava asked, her voice low. Alex's gaze flickered briefly to the rearview mirror, then back to the road. More than I trust anyone in this world. But it's a risk. We're not the only ones looking for him. Lena scoffed, shaking her head. This feels like a bad idea. We don't have a choice, Alex said, his tone flat. We need resources, weapons, information. If we don't find them, we're dead. And if they get to you, Ava? His words trailed off, the weight of the unspoken threat hanging between them. Ava nodded. She understood all too well. This wasn't just about staying alive anymore. It was about stopping the people who had destroyed everything they held dear. The syndicate had taken too much, and they would take more if she didn't put an end to it. The car sped through the streets, the sound of tires on asphalt echoing in the silence. It felt like they were driving straight into the heart of a storm, but Ava couldn't afford to second-guess herself now. Soon, Alex made a sharp turn off the main road, heading into an industrial district on the outskirts of the city. The buildings were abandoned, their windows shattered, casting eerie reflections in the dim light. It felt like they had entered another world, one far removed from the bustling streets of the city they had just left behind. "We're here," Alex said, slowing the car and pulling into a hidden alleyway. The headlights flickered out as he parked, leaving them in near-complete darkness. Ava's eyes scanned the area, searching for any signs of movement. "This is it." Alex nodded, his expression unreadable. "Stay close, and stay quiet." They got out of the car, the sound of their footsteps muted by the thick fog rolling in from the river. The air was cold, biting into their skin as they moved cautiously toward a steel door at the back of an old warehouse. Alex knocked 3 times, the sound sharp and deliberate. A moment passed, then another knock came from the other side, this one in response, a code. Alex glanced at Ava and Lena. "Be ready for anything." Ava's stomach churned as the door creaked open, revealing a figure in the shadows. The man was tall, his features obscured by the darkness, but Ava could make out the unmistakable outline of a gun holstered at his side. "Alex," the man said, his voice low and gravelly, "thought I'd never see you again." "Not yet, anyway," Alex replied, stepping forward and shaking the man's hand. "This is Ava and Lena. We need your help." The man studied them for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "You've brought them here? They're part of this?" "They're the reason we're still alive," Alex said, his voice firm. The man grunted, then stepped aside, motioning for them to enter. "Come in. We don't have much time." Inside, the space was sparse, just a few crates and a table covered with scattered papers and maps. A small light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a dim glow over the room. Ava's gaze lingered on a map pinned to the wall, marking various locations around the city: military outposts, government buildings, private companies. It was clear that this man had resources, and he wasn't afraid to use them. "Who are you?" Lena asked, her eyes sharp. The man smirked. "Name's Ronan. I've been doing this longer than most people would care to admit. Now, what do you need?" Alex quickly explained their situation, laying out the pieces of their plan. They needed weapons, intel on the syndicate, and any contacts who might be able to help them infiltrate the organization. Ronan listened intently, nodding as he absorbed the information. "I can get you some of that," Ronan said after a moment of silence. "But you'll owe me. You know how this works." Ava didn't hesitate. "Whatever it takes." Ronan's eyes glinted in the low light. "Good. Then get comfortable. We're going to need every bit of intel you've got, and a lot more." As the tension in the room built, Ava felt a surge of determination flood through her. They were getting closer, closer to ending this nightmare. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something much darker. They were on the verge of crossing a line they couldn't uncross. But Ava knew one thing for sure. There was no going back now. Time had become a luxury they no longer had, as the walls seemed to close in tighter with each passing hour. The dim light of the warehouse flickered overhead as Ava, Alex, and Lena gathered around the table, where Ronan had spread out a collection of maps, blueprints, and photos. Each image was a piece of a puzzle that they had to solve before the syndicate moved in on them, before it was too late. Ronan leaned over the table, his fingers tracing the maps with deliberate precision. "We've got intel on a major syndicate operation happening tonight," he said, his voice low but urgent. "This could be your shot, but it won't be easy." Ava looked at the others, her heart racing. "What are we looking at?" Ronan's eyes flickered to Alex before returning to the maps. "This is their supply route. Weapons, drugs, whatever they're moving, they pass through here. It's heavily guarded, but I've got a way in. If you want to take them down, this is your chance." Lena frowned. "Sounds too good to be true. What's the catch?" Ronan glanced at her, a smirk playing at the corners of his lips. "The catch is that it's a high-risk operation. If we screw up, the syndicate will wipe us out. But if you want to bring them down, this is the only opening I can give you." Alex crossed his arms, his gaze steady. "We don't have a choice. We go in tonight." Ava turned to face him, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "Are you sure about this? We don't know what we're walking into." We'll never know until we try, Alex replied, his tone grim. And we're not walking into anything. We're running it. We hit them hard. Take everything they've got. Ava nodded, feeling the weight of the decision settle in her bones. She couldn't back out now. The stakes were too high. This wasn't just about taking down a criminal organization. It was about saving the lives of everyone the syndicate had hurt, including their own. We go in prepared, she said, her voice calm but resolute. We don't leave anything to chance. Ronan pulled out a folder and handed it to Alex. These are the details. The guards, the weapons they'll have, the layout of the compound. You'll need to move fast. We'll have a window of about 15 minutes before they realize something's wrong. Alex opened the folder, scanning the contents. 15 minutes. That's not a lot of time. It's all we'll get, Ronan said. After that, they'll be on high alert, and you'll be lucky to get out with your lives. Ava felt a chill run down her spine. It was a calculated risk, but there was no other option. The syndicate had too much power, too many resources. If they didn't take action now, they might never get another chance. Lena glanced at Ava, her expression unreadable. I don't like it, but we're in this together, right? Ava nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle over her. They were risking everything tonight. Everything they had worked for, everything they had left. But they couldn't stop now. The syndicate would keep coming, keep destroying, until there was nothing left. We're in this together, Ava affirmed. Ronan handed over a set of keys. I've arranged for a vehicle. It'll get you close to the compound. I've also set up a few distractions to buy you some time. You'll have the element of surprise, but once you're inside, it's on you to finish the job. Alex took the keys without hesitation. We'll do what we can, but this doesn't end tonight. We still have to take down the heart of the syndicate. Ronan gave a sharp nod. Don't get cocky. You'll need every ounce of luck you can get to pull this off. The room was filled with tension as they prepared to leave. Ava gathered her gear, the weight of her weapons a constant reminder of the stakes. Tonight, they would either destroy the syndicate or become its latest victims. There was no room for failure. As they made their way to the vehicle, Ava's thoughts were a swirl of uncertainty and determination. She wasn't sure if they were ready for what lay ahead, but there was no turning back now. The syndicate had taken too much, and if they didn't stop them tonight, they would lose everything. The vehicle Ronan had arranged was a black van, inconspicuous but sturdy enough for what they needed. Alex slid behind the wheel, and Ava took the passenger seat, while Lena sat in the back, her eyes scanning the street for any signs of trouble. They pulled out of the alleyway, the city lights flashing past them like a blur. The sound of the engine was the only thing that cut through the silence of the night. The closer they got to the compound, the tighter the knot in Ava's stomach became. The plan was risky, but it was the only shot they had. 15 minutes. If they didn't make it count, it could be the end of them. As Alex navigated through the back streets, his eyes never leaving the road, Ava checked her gear one last time. She was ready. Or at least, she had to be. We're almost there, Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper. Get ready. Ava glanced at the dashboard clock. They had just under 10 minutes left before the operation would begin. The adrenaline coursing through her veins was both terrifying and invigorating. This was it, the point of no return. As they neared the compound, the darkness seemed to deepen, swallowing the road ahead. Ava's thoughts raced, her mind calculating every move they needed to make, every contingency plan. They couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Their time was running out, and the enemy was closer than they realized. Every second counted, and with their backs against the wall, there was no room for hesitation. The silence before the storm felt like an eternity, each passing second stretching out longer than the last. Ava's heart pounded in her chest as the van slowed to a stop, the glow of the compound's security lights flickering in the distance. She could see the high fence surrounding the perimeter, the armed guards walking the grounds. They were close, too close for comfort, but they still had the element of surprise. Alex shifted the van into park and cut the engine. The abrupt silence of the vehicle left Ava feeling exposed, her senses heightened, waiting for something to go wrong. The plan was simple in theory. Get in, disable the perimeter, take out the guards, and secure the entrance to the main building. But nothing about it felt simple. Not anymore. We move fast and we move quiet, Alex said, his voice low but firm. Lena, take the left flank. Ava, you're with me on the right. Ava nodded, gripping her weapon tightly. She didn't need to be told twice. She had been in dangerous situations before, but this one felt different. This was bigger than just taking down a few criminals. Tonight, they were going after the heart of the syndicate, and if they failed, it could set off a chain reaction that would destroy everything they had fought for. Lena opened the side door, slipping out of the van with the grace of a shadow. Ava followed, her boots hitting the cold asphalt with barely a sound. They moved into position, crouched low, their eyes scanning the perimeter as they approached the security fence. The moonlight illuminated the compound, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out across the ground. The guards were patrolling in predictable intervals, and it didn't take long for Ava and Alex to find their openings. Ava's breath was steady, her every step calculated as she moved toward the nearest guard. She could feel the adrenaline flooding her veins, but she couldn't afford to let it take control. Not now. She reached the guard first, her movements precise. In one fluid motion, she incapacitated him, dragging him into the shadows before he could make a sound. Her heart beat loudly in her chest, but her body was calm, focused. This was what she had trained for. Alex was right behind her, taking down the second guard with ease. Their silent takedown was flawless, a well-practiced dance of strategy and skill. They were in, and the first hurdle was behind them. They worked quickly, moving toward the control panel near the gate. Ava's fingers flew over the keypad, bypassing the security system that would normally lock them out. The gate creaked open, just wide enough for them to slip through. "Nice work," Alex whispered as they moved deeper into the compound. Ava didn't respond. Her eyes were on the prize. They had only a small window of time before the guards realized something was wrong. They had to get inside and take control before that happened. The building loomed ahead, its dark windows offering no indication of what was inside. Ava's senses were on high alert as they moved forward, staying low and out of sight. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, though. It was almost as if the compound itself was alive, waiting for them to make a mistake. They reached the door to the main building without incident, but Ava's gut twisted. Something wasn't right. Before she could voice her concern, the door to the building slammed open. A group of armed men appeared, their weapons raised, eyes scanning the area. The element of surprise had just evaporated. "Get down," Alex shouted, pushing Ava behind the nearest stack of crates as gunfire erupted around them. Ava's heart slammed against her ribs as she flattened herself to the ground, the sharp crack of bullets ricocheting off the concrete walls. The guards were fast, and their weapons were lethal, but they weren't the only ones with firepower. "Lena, now," Ava shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. She didn't know where Lena was, but she trusted her. Lena was a ghost in moments like this, silent, deadly, and always where she needed to be. The sound of a silenced gunshot rang out, and one of the guards crumpled to the ground. Then another. The tide of the battle shifted in their favor, but the fight was far from over. Ava took a deep breath, her finger tightening around the trigger of her weapon. She peeked around the corner, taking out the nearest guard before pulling back into cover. She could hear Alex's voice over the comms, coordinating their moves, directing them toward the heart of the compound. "We need to move now." Alex's voice was sharp with urgency. "There's no time left." Ava nodded, her mind racing. They were so close, but the enemy wasn't giving up without a fight. They had to break through. This was their chance. She glanced at Lena, who had emerged from the shadows, a determined glint in her eye. Together, they charged forward, weapons raised, making their way toward the building's entrance. "Get in, get the intel, and get out." "Fast," Ava ordered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. The doors to the main building loomed before them, but as they approached, Ava felt the ground beneath her feet shift. The weight of the moment pressed down on her. They had to move with purpose. There was no room for hesitation. As they burst through the door, Ava's instincts kicked in. They moved like a well-oiled machine, clearing each room methodically. The gunfire had slowed, but there was no telling how many more guards were lurking in the shadows. Their eyes scanned every corner, every doorway. Time was slipping away, and they had to secure the intel before the syndicate could react. The mission was far from over, and the countdown had already begun. Every second they wasted could cost them everything. The air felt thick with tension, the weight of the ticking clock pressing down on their every movement. Ava's breath was shallow, her pulse thumping in her ears as she and her team navigated the dark corridors of the compound. The sound of muffled footsteps echoed through the hall, adding to the growing pressure. They were inside, but the real challenge had only just begun. They had breached the building, but now they were facing the heart of the syndicate's operations. Ava's mind raced through the plan. Secure the intel, eliminate the leaders, and get out. Simple, right? But as she turned the corner, she saw a shadow move at the end of the hallway, and everything inside her screamed to stop. "Hold up," she whispered, raising her hand to signal Alex and Lena. They froze, crouching low to the ground as Ava listened for any sound that might give them a clue about what was ahead. A door creaked open nearby, and Ava's instincts kicked in. She motioned for Lena to take the rear, and then moved forward with Alex, staying in the shadows. The last thing they needed was to be caught off guard. They reached the end of the hallway without incident, but the moment they turned the corner into the next room, their worst fear became reality. The sound of gunfire rang out as an armed guard stepped into view, his weapon trained on them. Ava's heart skipped a beat as she dove for cover, her gun already in hand. The first shot missed, but the second one didn't. She could hear Alex's voice, calm and precise, giving orders as he returned fire. The guard dropped to the ground, but there was no time to savor the victory. They had to keep moving. "We're running out of time," Alex said, his voice tight. "The intel's in the next room." Ava didn't need to be told twice. She nodded, signaling Lena to follow her as they advanced cautiously. They could already hear the sound of approaching footsteps. Reinforcements were on the way. They reached the door to the command center, and Ava's breath caught in her throat. The door was fortified, but it wouldn't stop them. She pulled out her explosive charges, placing them with precision, then stepped back. "Clear!" she shouted to Alex and Lena. The explosion was deafening, the door crumpling inwards as smoke billowed into the room. Ava wasted no time. She was already through the doorway, weapon raised and ready. Inside, the room was a chaotic mess of equipment, monitors, and files. But Ava wasn't here for the scenery. She was here for one thing, and one thing only: the data that would take down the syndicate. She moved quickly, rifling through drawers and shredding any papers that could be compromised. The hard drives were more important, and that's where her focus was now. "Lena, cover me," she ordered as she found the servers. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, trying to extract the intel as quickly as possible. Lena's sharp eyes scanned the room, her weapon never wavering from the door. The seconds stretched into minutes as the countdown to disaster loomed closer. Ava felt the pressure of the moment tightening like a vice, each second ticking away as if the world was about to collapse around them. The data was almost ready to transfer when the door suddenly slammed open. A group of armed guards flooded into the room, their guns aimed at the team. Ava's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't hesitate. She dove for cover, rolling behind a desk as bullets flew past her head. "Move!" she shouted to Alex and Lena, her voice sharp as they opened fire. It was a matter of survival now. The syndicate had just thrown everything they had at them, and the only way out was to fight their way through. Gunfire filled the room, deafening and relentless. Ava squeezed off a few more shots, taking down 2 of the guards in rapid succession. But it wasn't enough. There were too many of them. "Lena, go. Get the data," Ava shouted, her voice hoarse. Lena didn't need to be told twice. She sprinted toward the server rack, pulling the hard drives free just as a bullet grazed her arm. She flinched but kept moving, her face set in grim determination. Ava and Alex continued to lay down cover fire, but it wasn't enough. They were surrounded, and the walls of the room felt like they were closing in. Ava's thoughts raced, and she knew they had only moments before the enemy would overwhelm them. There was no more time. "We're out of options," Alex yelled. "We need to move now." But Ava couldn't leave without the intel. She had made a promise to herself that she would take down the syndicate, and this was their one chance. They couldn't let it slip away. Suddenly, a new voice echoed through the comms, and Ava's heart stopped. "Drop your weapons. Now." It was the leader of the syndicate. He had known they were coming. He had been waiting for them. The walls were closing in, and there was no way out. Ava knew that the final hour had arrived. Everything they had worked for was about to come to a head. The cold steel of the gun pressed against her temple, but Ava's resolve was as strong as ever. She wasn't going down without a fight. The leader of the syndicate, a cold and calculating man named Darius Voss, stood at the doorway, his eyes scanning the room with an air of superiority. Ava could see the faintest glint of a smile tug at the corner of his lips as he watched her team, cornered and outnumbered. "You've caused me quite a bit of trouble, Agent Ava," Voss said, his voice smooth and mocking. "But I think it's time for you to realize this is where it ends." Ava didn't flinch. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. The room was chaos, with smoke from the explosion still filling the air, but her mind was as clear as ever. She had one goal left: get the data out, stop Voss, and make sure they all made it out alive. Her eyes darted to Lena, who was still clutching the hard drives. But Voss's men were closing in on her position, forcing Lena to drop to the ground, her weapon slipping from her grasp. "Give it to me," Voss ordered, his voice low and menacing. Ava's hand twitched towards her sidearm, but before she could react, the cold barrel of a gun pressed against her neck. The air in the room grew heavy, the sense of finality thickening with each passing second. "You're done, Ava," Voss continued, stepping closer, his smug expression never wavering. "This is the end of your little crusade." But Ava's mind was already working. She trained for this moment. She knew what it took to survive situations like this, and she wasn't going to let him win. Not now. Lena, though pinned down, had managed to free herself enough to make a move. With one swift motion, she activated a flash grenade from her belt and hurled it toward Voss's position. The explosion was deafening, blinding everyone in the room. The guards screamed, stumbling backward, their vision compromised. Ava took advantage of the chaos, drawing her gun with lightning speed and firing at the guards nearest to her. One by one, they dropped, their weapons no match for her precision. "Move!" she shouted to Alex, who had been waiting for the signal. He was already on his feet, rushing to Lena's side to protect her as she gathered the hard drives. Voss was momentarily disoriented, but he recovered quickly. His eyes locked onto Ava, fury now replacing the earlier amusement. "You really think you can escape?" he hissed. "You're outnumbered and outgunned. There's nowhere to run." Ava didn't answer. Instead, she took a deep breath and sprinted toward the back of the room, pulling Lena along with her. The countdown to their extraction was ticking in her mind, but there was still one last challenge: Voss. As they reached the far exit, Ava turned and fired one last shot at Voss's men, forcing them to take cover. She knew they couldn't hold out forever, but they didn't need to. They only needed to survive long enough for the extraction team to arrive. The door to the exit slammed open, and the roar of helicopter blades filled the air. Ava's heart surged with relief. It was their only chance. "Go!" she yelled to Lena, pushing her forward into the open. The extraction team was waiting outside, the helicopter hovering just a few feet away. But before they could reach the safety of the helicopter, a shot rang out, echoing through the night air. Ava felt a sharp pain in her side, but she didn't slow down. Her body was screaming, but her mind was still sharp. She had to finish this. With one final push, they reached the helicopter. The crew pulled them in, lifting them away from the compound and into the sky. Ava collapsed into a seat, her breath ragged, but she managed to smile. "We made it," Lena said, her voice a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. Ava nodded, but her eyes were fixed on the hard drives in Lena's hands. They had done it. The syndicate was finished, but Voss's words still echoed in her mind. "You're done, Ava." It wasn't over. Not yet. She had won this battle, but Ava knew the war was far from over. The fight for justice would continue, and she would be ready.